Creatures in the Dales are having to forage extra hard to survive the toughest of winters. The new series of Yorkshire A Year in the Wild continues in an hour. First, we delve into history and go inside Westminster Abbey.
Westminster Abbey, Britain's most famous church. For nearly 1,000 years, this incredible building has been at the very heart of British public life. And it's our royal family's church. It's here that for centuries, kings and queens have held their greatest royal occasions.
Westminster Abbey is the stage on which our greatest national ceremonies are played out.
This is where royal couples have been married with pomp and ceremony. It is the only place in Britain where our kings and queens can be crowned.
She looked so young and vulnerable. I felt, what a burden. It brought a lump to my throat, quite literally.
And it's where the royal family come to say their last goodbyes.
Everybody felt she was their granny, so they should go and pay respects, and that's exactly what they did.
But Westminster Abbey is also the nation's own village church. It's where we remember our heroes and our fallen sons.
This is the chance for people just to stop, pause, and remember, and to grieve.
At times of hope and despair, the country has turned to Westminster Abbey. And it has brought us together and reminded us of who we are as a nation.
Westminster Abbey goes on happening. It goes on really symbolising our history to us. There's nowhere like it.
One November night in 2010, after the doors had closed to the general public, Westminster Abbey received a special visitor. Her future bride was inspecting the most famous church in Britain. The building that would change her life forever. In 6 months' time, she would walk into the Abbey a commoner and leave as our future queen. And she'd bring this ancient institution well and truly into the modern age. Kate Middleton and Prince William announced their engagement in front of the world's media on November the 16th, 2010.
Did you get down on one knee? Yeah, I've been waiting to see. That's going to stay a secret, Peter.
It was the news the world had been waiting for, since the couple's relationship was made public over 6 years earlier.
Well, it was so anticipated, wasn't it? They'd been going out for so long, and then there'd been this, great sort of sense of, is he ever going to propose?
Planning began immediately for a royal wedding that would be unlike any other that had gone before. And the first major decision was where to hold it.
There's only a couple of places that are the second in line to the throne can get married. There is no chance that Kate could have got married in the village church in Bucklebury, where she was from. Would never have been allowed. The royals have got two churches, there's St Paul's and Westminster Abbey, but unfortunately St Paul's was where Diana married Charles, and that ended pretty badly. It had to be Westminster Abbey.
While royal palaces have come and gone, Westminster Abbey has been one of the most important buildings to the royal family for nearly 1,000 years. 17 monarchs are buried in the Abbey, 38 kings and queens have been crowned here, and Kate and William were about to become the 16th royal couple to marry here.
Westminster Abbey is the stage on which our greatest national ceremonies are played out, and has been for centuries. That's what gives it its unique importance.
No other venue could offer such grandeur, tradition, and history.
There is 1,000 years laid before you, and it's incredibly moving and it's reassuring. Most things seem pretty trivial when faced with so much history in one place.
Westminster Abbey was where William's grandparents, the Queen and Prince Philip, and his great-grandparents, the Queen Mother and King George VI, were married. But this royal wedding would bring a major break in tradition. The future king was marrying a commoner with no aristocratic ties whatsoever. William's bride was a middle-class girl from Berkshire.
Kate Middleton wasn't even the daughter of a peer. I mean, she was as common a commoner as common could be, and this was seen as already quite radical.
Royal weddings follow strict tradition and are meticulously planned. But it was clear from the beginning that control of this royal event would not rest with palace officials, but with the bride and groom. This royal couple knew exactly what they wanted from their wedding and insisted on doing things their way.
We were told by William's private secretary that from the start it had been Kate and William calling the shots on this wedding.
The couple quickly set about taking control of their guest list. Royal wedding protocol normally means a strict pecking order of dignitaries. Kate and William, however, decided to invite over 1,000 of their own friends, from the local butcher in Kate's home of Bucklebury to A-list celebrities.
William probably felt, firstly, there was a wedding list presented to him, and he sort of tore it up because he didn't know anybody and decided he'd invite who he wanted to invite, and she wanted to invite.
They did, nevertheless, still have to have David Cameron. I mean, there was no option about that. He had to come along.
As preparation got underway, it became clear that this would be a very modern and personalised royal wedding. The future Duchess of Cambridge was determined to put her own stamp on the Abbey, as no other royal bride had done before. She asked for 8 hornbeam and English maple trees to be brought in to line the nave of Westminster Abbey.
There's a famous old avenue of trees in her home village where she might have been expected to marry, and they brought that into a royal setting. And nobody had ever done anything like that before, but oddly it worked, and it was rather moving.
But Kate and William didn't dispense with all tradition. They made sure the public's appetite for royal pomp and ceremony would be satisfied. As Westminster Abbey began the celebration of this very modern wedding, London came to a standstill. Just as it had nearly 60 years earlier, when the building welcomed a young queen to the throne in the most spectacular royal event in living memory. An event that had been threatened by the shocking theft of a crucial part of the ritual. Westminster Abbey, in the heart of London, is the nation's most famous church, and it is the royal church. It has been the site of royal weddings, funerals, and coronations since the 11th century. And on the 29th of April 2011, the Abbey hosted the most eagerly anticipated wedding in decades. Prince William was marrying Kate Middleton, a middle-class girl from Berkshire. Wedding fever gripped the country.
Yeah, and everyone's together, they're all like feeling part of something. It's brilliant, I love it.
1 million visitors arrived in the capital to witness the pomp and pageantry of a major royal event. 5,000 police officers formed a ring of steel, encircling the capital in one of the biggest security operations the country had ever seen. At 8:30 a.m., 1,900 carefully chosen guests started filing into Westminster Abbey, and the world saw that this would be a royal wedding like no other. Among the usual dignitaries were 1,000 of the couple's personal friends, and plenty of famous faces.
Everybody was watching the wedding and they're thinking, oh, look, there's Posh Spice. Is she going to give birth in the church? Look at Princess Beatrice's dreadful hat. People saw the soap opera of figures that they're used to seeing in celebrity life. And I think that that made them feel a great deal warmer and more positive towards the royal couple than perhaps if we'd just seen a lot of, stuffy old European royals in silly uniforms.
It's the new aristocracy, really, of celebrities who've replaced the dukes and the barons. They're the people whose approval is needed to bless this union.
Kate had also invited locals from her home village of Bucklebury.
There were still a great many foreign royals and dignitaries right alongside the landlord of the pub and the butcher from Bucklebury and the people who worked in the local spa.
But there was one notable absence.
The thing that springs to mind is the awkward aunt, Fergie. They took the quite brutal step, I thought, of just not asking her.
Kate's arrival at the Abbey also broke with tradition, as she arrived not in a horse-drawn carriage, but in a black Rolls-Royce. An estimated 2 billion people worldwide watched on TV as the ceremony got underway.
Because of all the personal touches, this felt like a private wedding to which we all happened to be invited.
The couple said their vows at the Abbey's ancient high altar, the spot where royal ceremonies have taken place for centuries.
William and Kate were proving in the grandeur and splendour of the ceremony they had a show of strength. They were showing that the monarchy is still strong, it's still here, and though we are modern young people, we're still very much part of this tradition.
The very modern future king and queen left the Abbey in a very traditional royal procession.
I thought it was very symbolic, the fact that she arrived, Miss Middleton of Berkshire, in a car with her father, and she left as a royal princess in a carriage with her prince.
Westminster Abbey dominates one side of Parliament Square in the heart of London's Westminster, a place synonymous with power and tradition. It was originally built as a royal burial church in the 11th century by the Anglo-Saxon king Edward the Confessor. At the heart of the cross-shaped abbey is the only place in the country where British kings and queens can be crowned. This is the sanctuary. Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and Queen Victoria all stood on this spot in front of the high altar and swore an oath to God to defend and rule their people. It's this weight of history that makes Westminster Abbey so important when a new monarch comes to the throne.
Anyone can stand up and go, I'm a king, I'm a queen, anyone can put on a crown. But you need more than that. You need to have something that persuades people that you have authority.
The last monarch to be crowned here was our current queen, Elizabeth II. But the coronation ceremony predates the Abbey itself and has remained unchanged for centuries. Kings and queens are anointed with holy oil before receiving the regalia, the golden orb, the scepter, and the crown. And since 1308, they've all sat in the same coronation chair.
There's anointing with this holy oil, which is fairly stinky. There's sitting on this incredibly old and uncomfortable chair, which looks like it's just come out of a Viking banqueting hall.
As with any state occasion, coronations are meticulously planned and rehearsed, although things have not always gone to plan.
I mean, the shambles was really, George III, where the canopy was virtually falling on top of Queen Charlotte. Everything went wrong with that. Nobody knew what they were doing or what it was about or anything. And then, of course, Queen Victoria, the Archbishop, rammed the coronation ring onto the wrong finger. But you stick to it. Nobody notices. You stick to it.
But on Christmas Day 1950, something far more serious happened. A sacred and crucial part of the coronation ritual went missing.
A Christmas Day sensation at Westminster Abbey. The Stone of Destiny, which had been there for some 600 years, was stolen from the coronation chair.
The Stone of Destiny, or Stone of Scone, was the coronation stone for ancient Scottish kings, before it was captured and brought to England by King Edward I in 1296. Edward had the coronation chair built to house the stone, and it's in this chair that all coronations since have taken place. To hold a coronation without the stone would be unthinkable. The team that broke into Westminster Abbey weren't experienced criminals, but Scottish nationalist students driven by an ancient grudge to get the stone back, at any cost.
There were a few details they hadn't thought about, like that it would be really, really heavy. When they pulled out the Stone of Destiny, this very precious piece of national heritage, it broke in two. They prized the stone out, broke the chair. What on earth was the night watchman in the Abbey doing that he didn't notice that all of this was going on right under his nose?
A nationwide hunt followed. But the stone was nowhere to be found until 4 months later, when it reappeared, repaired and wrapped in a Scottish flag on the altar at the Abbey of Arbroath in Scotland. Two years later, with the stone back in place beneath the coronation chair, Westminster Abbey played host to an event that would burn itself into the collective memory of the British public: the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Her father, King George VI, had died 16 months earlier, leaving his 25-year-old daughter next in line to the throne. On the 2nd of June 1953, an estimated 3 million people lined the streets of London in one of the biggest celebrations in royal history.
It was a colossal occasion. The procession actually took 45 minutes to pass anyone's spot.
This spectacular event was designed to give the country something to celebrate when it needed it most.
Britain in the 1950s was pretty grim. Although the war was over, there was still rationing, there was bomb sites all over London. So to have a coronation, to have all that pomp and ceremony and splendour, and the start of a new era, a new Elizabethan era as well, was something that the whole nation wanted to get behind and be part of, in a sense.
Inside Westminster Abbey, the first of the 8,251 guests took their seats. The building was filled to over 4 times its usual capacity. Also crammed in were 180 choir boys, among them 12-year-old James Wilkinson.
The seats that the peers and peeresses have were chairs specially made, and they had plenty of room. Choir boys were very cramped. We had no legroom at all. And it was quite uncomfortable, but, we survived.
And as the nation waited to welcome their new queen, the morning papers brought news of another major event. A British expedition had reached the summit of Everest.
One of the other exciting things about that morning was to be told that we'd climbed Everest. So that added to the frisson of excitement. Britain was conquering the world.
Guests had been filing into the Abbey from 6 a.m. As the Queen's arrival drew near, many had been in their seats for nearly 5 hours and were getting restless.
There was a build-up of excitement just before the service was due to start. And everybody thought the Queen had arrived because there was a bustle at the west end of the Abbey. So everybody rose, 8,000 people rose in their seats. When from underneath the organ loft came 2 cleaners in boiler suits. And everybody thought it was very funny, except the Archbishop of Canterbury.
At 11 a.m., the Queen arrived through the west door, flanked by 250 dignitaries and 6 maids of honor tasked with carrying her 5.5-meter long train. Among them, 20-year-old Lady Jane Rain Lacy.
When all was ready, the Queen turned round and she said, "Are you ready, girls? I think we should go." And then off we went.
The glorious colours and the carpet, the blues and the golds, and all the peers and peeresses in their ermine and crimson mantles. It was a fantastic sight.
As the Queen arrived at the high altar, the most sacred part of the ceremony could begin. This was the anointing, and it was considered so holy that it was hidden from view under a canopy. Lady Rain Lacy was one of a handful of people able to watch as the Archbishop anointed the Queen with oil, making the sign of the cross on her head, hands, and chest.
She looked so serene and calm and rather vulnerable. I felt what a burden on this slim young woman. And this is going to be her for her whole life. It brought a lump to my throat, quite literally.
After months of meticulous planning, the service had gone without a hitch.
The Queen did congratulate us afterwards. She said, "Well done, girls." She looked so relieved and so happy.
But what made this coronation truly remarkable was that the entire nation was invited into the Abbey to watch. For the first time ever, it was broadcast live on television, and some 27 million people tuned in. Westminster Abbey had brought Britain into a new Elizabethan age and into the modern media world.
It was an amazing occasion. It was history in the making.
The Abbey had turned a page in British history. It had lifted the entire country's spirits and renewed hope. But over the coming decades, Westminster Abbey would unite Britain not only in celebration, but also in sorrow. Westminster Abbey, the place where the nation remembers its heroes and where the royal family says its last goodbyes. 17 kings and queens have been buried here, along with over 3,000 of the great and the good, from Dickens to Darwin.
It's the royal family's personal church, and it's the whole nation's village church. It's the place that we all go to hatch, match and dispatch the important people.
There's now little space left for burials, but a funeral service in Westminster Abbey can still bring you a lasting legacy. But no funeral happens here without the say-so of the Queen. Westminster Abbey is a royal peculiar, meaning that it's run by a dean who answers only to the monarch. Only the most senior royals are granted a send-off at the Abbey. But in 1997, the country was paralysed with grief, and the Queen agreed to a ceremonial funeral at Westminster Abbey for Diana, even though she had been stripped of her royal title. But this wasn't the first time the Queen had made an exception to the rules. Nearly 20 years earlier, she'd granted permission for another Westminster Abbey funeral, after some persuasion by the very person who wanted to be remembered there, Lord Louis Mountbatten. Lord Mountbatten was uncle to the Duke of Edinburgh, a former head of the armed forces and the last Viceroy of India.
Lord Mountbatten had a very particular place within the royal family, and not always an uncontroversial one, because in terms of the official pecking order, he was quite far down the line. But he was determined not to remain there.
Mountbatten spent much of his life plotting to further his position within the heart of the royal family. He had helped to engineer the Queen's marriage to his nephew Philip, and was a mentor and surrogate grandfather to the young Prince Charles.
I don't think the Queen Mother particularly liked him muscling in on royal occasions, but he certainly played up his status as a war hero.
He was, in many ways, a brilliant, a multi-talented man, but also a man who was very concerned with his status.
In 1979, Lord Mountbatten was on a holiday in Ireland when a bomb on board his boat exploded. Mountbatten was killed, along with his 14-year-old grandson, his daughter's mother-in-law, and a local teenager. The IRA had claimed their first royal victim.
It was perhaps the most audacious act of terrorism of the IRA's campaign. There was a great public outburst of grief, anger, recrimination, and sorrow.
What the grieving nation needed was a funeral on a grand scale, which was exactly what Mountbatten had planned. Over the last 10 years of his life, he dedicated himself to organizing his own funeral at Westminster Abbey. He arranged for personnel from all 3 British armed forces to march in his procession, and compiled an immense guest list that included numerous heads of state and political leaders.
He planned every single detail. He planned not just who should be invited and where they should sit, but he planned things like exactly how many steps it would take the men who were carrying his body to get from the train, to the carriage. His son-in-law, Lord Brabourne, said to him, "Isn't this a bit macabre? Doesn't it upset you?" And Mountbatten said, "The only thing that upsets me is that I can't be there."
But Mountbatten's real masterstroke was persuading the Queen to allow him a royal send-off at Westminster Abbey. It raised eyebrows among palace courtiers, but would cement his royal legacy forever. On the 5th of September 1979, Mountbatten's epic plan became reality. But the event he'd imagined as a spectacular celebration of his life took on a new poignancy in the wake of his tragic death. Mountbatten's horse, Dolly, led the procession with her master's boots reversed in the stirrups. Behind her, 131 sailors pulled his coffin. Every detail of Mountbatten's plan was followed through, down to the 6 velvet cushions on which his medals were carried. 15 million people watched the send-off on television. And just as Mountbatten had hoped, no one was left in any doubt about his royal credentials.
I think having his funeral in Westminster Abbey ensured that the people of Britain and the entire royal family would absolutely remember him as one of them.
The names of those buried and remembered inside Westminster Abbey play out as a roll call through the centuries of the nation's talent and royalty. But there is one exception. perhaps the most significant person in the building, an unnamed and unknown British soldier. In 1920, Britain was still reeling from the horrors of the First World War. It had brought slaughter on a scale no one had seen before. Over 700,000 British soldiers were killed in action. Amid the horrors of the battlefields of France and Belgium, hundreds of thousands of British dead were hastily buried where they fell, often in communal graves. Families throughout Britain were devastated by loss, and many did not have a body to bury.
Across the country, Britain became consumed really by grief, and without having a body to mourn, without being able to have a private funeral, something else really was needed.
Amid this crisis, the British people looked to Westminster Abbey, and it was here that they would find comfort. The Dean of the Abbey and the government embarked on a plan to provide a grave where the whole country could mourn their fallen sons. The idea for the tomb came from an army chaplain who had been inspired by a simple grave he'd seen in a garden in France. It was marked by a rough cross with the words, "An unknown British soldier." In November 1920, 2 undertakers headed to the battlefields of the First World War to recover one body from the thousands who had died there. A careful plan ensured that the identity of the soldier could never be known.
The unknown warrior, the most crucial thing about this whole idea is that he is an unknown, that he cannot be identified. And that is because it has to be possible for everybody across the nation back home to believe that this could be their loved one.
Teams went to 4 different battlegrounds and exhumed a body at random from each site. These 4 bodies were brought together and placed under armed guard in Saint-Paul, northern France. At midnight, the head of the British Armed Forces arrived to select just one.
He comes and makes a very simple gesture. He just places a hand onto one of the bodies. And that's it. That is the unknown warrior.
From this moment on, the dead soldier was treated like royalty. And as the unknown warrior returned to Britain, the ultimate honor awaited him: a burial at Westminster Abbey. On the morning of the 11th of November 1920, 2 years after the guns fell silent, the body of the unknown warrior was drawn on a gun carriage towards Westminster Abbey. Lining the streets were thousands of grieving families. All of them believed that this could be the body of their loved one, and that this was their chance to say goodbye.
This is an event that is practically unparalleled until perhaps a bit later down the line, a funeral like Princess Diana's funeral, when you see that overwhelming outpouring of public grief that never really, of course, has happened before, and we haven't really seen the likes of it ever since.
As the body was lowered into the floor of Westminster Abbey, the country was united in sorrow.
This is the chance for people just to stop, pause, and remember, and to grieve.
Today, the tomb of the unknown warrior is one of the most visited war memorials in the world.
It still is the only tomb in the Abbey upon which nobody walks. Even during the coronation, when they transformed the inside of the Abbey, there was a dog leg around the unknown warrior's tomb so that nobody actually walks on it.
Interesting, the most exalted person in the whole church is the one who's nameless, the one who we don't know anything about.
Its history is what makes Westminster Abbey so unique. But the building must also move with the times, and now some are contemplating its future. One man wants to radically modernize its most sacred ceremony, the coronation, and he is Britain's next king. Westminster Abbey in the heart of London, the place where kings and queens are crowned, royal couples are married, and monarchs laid to rest. And one royal life, more than any other, was shaped by this building, the matriarch of the Windsors and one of the best-loved royals of all, the Queen Mother. It was at Westminster Abbey that the Queen Mother, then known as Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, became part of the royal family on her wedding day, the 26th of April, 1923. Her extraordinary royal career spanned nearly 80 years. She was crowned Queen Consort in 1937, and 16 years later she saw her daughter crowned on the very same spot in the Abbey.
All the key moments of her life took place in Westminster Abbey, as of course she lived her life in the knowledge that her own funeral eventually would.
Throughout her life, the Queen Mother's stoicism, charm, and sheer longevity had won her the love of the nation.
The Queen Mother, because she was over 100, she'd always been there. She had this sort of lovely, sort of fluttery, colourful warmth to her.
On the 30th of March 2002, the Queen Mother died. She was 101 years old. As her coffin lay in state at Westminster Hall, thousands waited for up to 6 hours to file past and pay their respects. She was the last of her kind.
There was a sense that she symbolised the old royal family. She'd been at Buckingham Palace in the Blitz. She had, in her own words, looked the East End in the face when she toured bomb-damaged houses in the East End of London. So she was the last survivor of a different, nobler Britain.
The end of this momentous life had to be marked with all the splendour that the nation could muster, and there could only be one venue, Westminster Abbey.
Without wanting to be too gloomy about this, they will have planned the Queen Mother's funeral some time in advance, and they chucked the kitchen sink at it in terms of pomp and ceremony and pageantry.
On the 9th of April 2002, the Queen Mother's coffin was carried towards Westminster Abbey on the same gun carriage that had taken her husband there 50 years earlier. Within this public event was a family dealing with their own private grief. Most of all, the Queen Mother's eldest grandson.
I remember how sad Charles looked in particular. I mean, we all know they were very close.
All eyes were on Westminster Abbey as the nation joined the royal family in mourning.
It was of a magnificence and of a resonance and so moving, had such a huge impact on the public and everything.
Strength, dignity, and, yes, laughter. You are in our...
Everybody felt she was their granny, so they should go and pay respects, and that's exactly what they did. And they came out on the streets. They stood there and they waited, and they watched, and they doffed their hats, and they bowed.
Westminster Abbey had closed a chapter on an incredible royal life, Today, the Queen, who was crowned at the Abbey over 60 years ago, has gone on to be the longest reigning monarch Britain has ever known. But for the building that will shape our future as much as it has shaped our past, thoughts have already turned to the coronation of our next monarch. For over a decade, a group of leading dignitaries have been meeting regularly behind closed doors. Their job is to plan Prince Charles's coronation. But in September 2016, their cover was blown by journalist Ned Donovan.
I was working on a different story that involved sort of collecting sort of random documents from different departments that were incredibly dull. In one of them, sort of normally you see in these documents huge swathes crossed out with black marker. But in this one, it seemed like someone had missed that entirely.
The document revealed the secret code name of the group planning Charles's coronation, Operation Golden Orb.
I connected it immediately to that golden orb which is held during the coronation.
Led by the Duke of Norfolk, Operation Golden Orb is tasked with organising a coronation that will bring the ancient ceremony and Westminster Abbey itself into the modern age.
There is a plan for coronations. You've got to blow the dust off it, because the last time we had one was in 1953, and you use that as a platform, and you do a 21st century variance on it.
And the heir to the throne has his own opinions about how he'd like to modernise the coronation. In 1994, Prince Charles expressed a wish to be crowned Defender of Faith, rather than Defender of the Faith, in an effort to be relevant in modern Britain.
In 1953, other faiths did not take part at the next coronation in a multicultural, multi-ethnic Britain. It's inconceivable that other faiths will not play a part in the ceremony.
While Westminster Abbey must move with the times, it's the weight of history that the building provides that makes it so important to the nation. It's a solid anchor in a changing world.
It's the heart of the United Kingdom, the one place where if you stood in the middle of that place, you went, well, there's nowhere with more British history than this one building. And you suddenly feel part of something very old and something very big.
For nearly 1,000 years, Westminster Abbey has been our national stage, uniting us during the events that matter not just to the royal family, but to the country as a whole. From a bold new marriage, to the start of an extraordinary reign, and a farewell to an unknown soldier. It's the place where we'll welcome our next king, and it will continue to bring us together and remind us of who we are, as no other building can.
Westminster Abbey goes on happening. It goes on being our great national stage. It goes on really symbolising our history to us. There's nowhere like it.
Let's hope our furry and feathered friends in the Dales have stocked up well for winter. The new series of Yorkshire, A Year in the Wild continues next, new on Channel 5. Then at 10, just how well do we know our Queen? Elizabeth II, Crown and Country, as the full rundown on our longest-serving monarch.